A few months after my heart attack, I sat across from my cardiologist for a follow-up. He pulled up my numbers, reviewed the data, and then he said something I did not expect to hear. He told me my recovery was in the top 1% of patients he sees. I want that to sit with you for a second, because here is what should have happened next. I should have felt relief, even pride maybe, a sense that the hardest part was behind me. But this isn't what actually happened. What I actually felt was fear. I want to tell you why, because I think there's something in that reaction that applies to you, whether you've ever set foot in a cardiologist's office or not. First, I need to go back further than I have in this podcast so far, further back than the stomach discomfort I told you about in the last episode. Welcome to Truth in a Digital World. I'm John Delaney, an AI strategy consultant, and your guide through the parts of change that nobody puts in the brochure. I've spent over 40 years in marketing and telecommunications and technology, 26 of those in digital marketing and web development, and the last 3 focused on AI strategy. But today, it's not really about any of that. I'll also tell you plainly, because it shapes everything that I do, I'm a follower of Jesus, and that faith grounds me. It's what I trust for clearer decisions in business and everywhere else. Now, that may not be the anchor for everyone listening, and that's okay. That's a decision each of us has to make for ourselves. But I'm not going to pretend it isn't mine, and you'll hear it show up in this show, especially in moments like today's. Today is about a number that scared me more than a 100% blocked artery did, and why understanding that fear might be the most useful thing I can hand you this season. So let's get into it. A few days before the stomach discomfort I told you about in the last episode, something else was happening that I never mentioned. My lower back started bothering me. Nothing dramatic, just enough that I could not get comfortable lying down. I would wake up far earlier than usual, and instead of staying in bed, I would get up and move to the reclining chair in my office. Night after night. I told myself it was my back, sleeping wrong, getting older. I had a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I used it. That was the first signal. Before the stomach. Before any of it. Now, I'm telling you this now, 2 episodes later, because I want to be honest about something. I did not see this pattern myself. My wife did. We sat down together before I recorded this episode, and she's the one who said, "Don't forget about your back. You were getting up and going to that chair for days before any of this started." I had genuinely forgotten, but she hadn't. After more than 40 years of marriage and raising 3 daughters together, I have learned, slowly, and with some resistance along the way, that she generally sees what I miss, and this was just one more entry into a very long list. It took her noticing and me being willing to actually listen to see how early the signal started. And that's its own lesson, and I'll come back to that eventually. But here's part of the story that I haven't told you yet, the part that explains the fear I felt sitting in that cardiologist's office. The heart attack was terrifying in an obvious way. There is no mystery to that fear. Something's wrong with your body, your life is at risk, and the fear matches the moment. The fear I felt in that follow-up appointment did not match the moment at all. I had just been told I was doing exceptionally well, and by every external measure, I had succeeded. So why did it feel like the floor moved? Here is what I eventually understood, and it took me longer than I want to admit. For months, my identity had been built around the recovery itself. I was a man working his way back, Every day had a clear job. Follow the plan, hit the milestones, do the next right thing. The recovery gave me a role, and that role gave me direction. Top 1% was not just praise. It was a plan ending. Now, if I was no longer recovering, if I had by every measure arrived, then who was I now? What was my job? The thing that had organized my days for months had just quietly closed. This isn't a health insight. This is a human one. And this is where my faith carried real weight, more than any plan or milestone could have. When the role of recovering man ran out, I needed something underneath it that didn't depend on a doctor's report or a number on a chart. That's what my faith has always been for me. Not something I lead every conversation with, but the ground I actually stand on when the role had been playing quietly ends. I've come to believe that moment something tells you you've made it, whether that's a doctor, a board meeting, a sales number, or a milestone you set for yourself years ago, that moment is often more disorienting than the crisis that came before it. A crisis gives you a clear enemy. Success asks you a much harder question. Now, what do I build my identity around? I do not think I am the only person this happens to. Here is where I want to turn this toward you. Think about a change you have been putting off. Not a small one, a real one. A habit you know you should build. A decision you've been circling for months. A version of your life or your health, your business that you know is right, but you haven't moved toward it. I used to assume the thing stopping people from changing was a lack of information. If they just knew the facts or the risks, the upside, they would act. I don't believe that anymore. Most resistance to change is not informational, it is emotional. And it usually traces back to one of a small number of very old, very human questions running quietly underneath the surface. Two of the most common ones in my experience are these. The first is some version of, am I safe? Now, not safe in a dramatic sense, safe from embarrassment, safe from being exposed as someone who doesn't know what they're doing, safe from a decision blowing up in a way other people will see. The second is some version of, am I good enough? Not good enough in a general sense. Good enough to actually pull this off without making it worse. Good enough that if I try and fail, it confirms something I already secretly fear about myself. Notice neither of these questions has anything to do with the facts of the decision itself. That is what I missed in the cardiologist's office. The data said I had succeeded, but underneath the data was a much older question. If I'm not recovering anymore, am I still safe? Am I still enough without that role to hide behind? No one had to teach me to ask that question. It was already running. And it's probably already running in you right now about whatever change you have been circling. I want to be careful here because I'm not a therapist and this isn't a therapy show. But I've spent 40 years watching people and businesses make decisions, and I've come to believe this. The facts almost never win in an argument against an unspoken fear. You can hand someone a perfect spreadsheet, a flawless case, overwhelming evidence, and they will still stall because the spreadsheet is answering a question that they are not actually asking. This shows up everywhere. It shows up when a business owner knows their website is invisible to AI search. We talked about that signal in the last episode, but still doesn't act because underneath the technical problem is a quieter one. What if I fix it and it still doesn't work? What does that say about me? It shows up when someone knows they need to see a doctor about a symptom and doesn't, because some part of them would rather not know than face being told something is wrong. It shows up when a leader knows their team needs to change how they work and delays it for a year because the real fear is not the change itself. It's what the change might reveal about decisions made years ago. I believe most stalled decisions are not stalled because people lack courage. They are stalled because nobody has named the actual question underneath the decision. An unnamed fear is much harder to move than a named one. So here's what I want you to do with this. Think of the one change that you've been putting off the longest. Not 10 things, one. And instead of asking yourself, why haven't I done this yet, which usually just produces guilt, ask yourself a different question. What am I actually afraid this change will prove about me? Not what you're afraid will happen externally, what you're afraid it will reveal internally about whether you're safe, whether you're capable, whether you're enough. Write the honest answer down, not the polished one. It's the first one that shows up. I promise you, once you can name it, it gets smaller. Fear that stays unnamed runs the show quietly in the background. Fear you can actually look at becomes something you can work with. That single shift from I don't know why I'm stuck to I'm stuck because I'm afraid this will prove I'm not enough is often the entire difference between another year of circling and finally moving. There is one more practical thing I want to leave you with, and it goes back to where this episode started. That chair in my office at 4 a.m. I want to remind you of something simple because I almost missed it myself. How you eat, how you move, and how you rest are not minor details. They are not the boring background to the real parts of your life. They are foundational. Every single day, no matter where you are on your own health journey, whether you are recovering from something, managing something, or simply living your normal life and assuming you have more time than you actually do. I ignored a sleep signal for days before I ignored a stomach signal. Both were real. Both were data. I treated both as inconvenient instead of important. You don't have to wait for a number from a cardiologist to start paying attention to how you're sleeping, how you're eating, how your body is moving through the day. That attention is not anxiety, it's stewardship. The top 1% number did not scare me because it was bad news. It scared me because it took away the role I'd been hiding in. I'm still working through what comes after that, and I expect I will be for a little while. What has steadied me through it is not a new plan or a new milestone. It's the same thing I mentioned at the top of this episode, my faith. Not as a performance and not as a headline, just the ground I actually stand on when the role I'd been playing quietly ends. I think most of us are looking for our next role, our next milestone, our next identity to hold on to, when what we actually need is something underneath all of that, something that doesn't move when the plan does. Now, by naming the fear, actually saying out loud, this is what I'm afraid of, was the first time since the hospital that I felt like I was choosing my next step instead of just reacting to one. I think that applies to you, whatever you're circling right now. In our next episode, I want to take the same idea and point it to somewhere you might not expect. The businesses that are stalling on AI right now are not stalling because they don't understand the technology. They're stalling for the exact same reason I sat frozen in that cardiologist's office. And once you see which fear is actually running the show in a business, you can finally do something about it. I'm John Delaney. This is Truth in the Digital World, and I'm glad you're here.